There are mornings when you open your eyes and feel as if your body is being held down by an invisible force. It isn't physical exhaustion, nor laziness, but a heaviness. You can't quite name a dense silence so thick that you cannot step into the new day the way you usually do. The world often tells you to push through, but Jung sees that moment as a subtle sign from the soul. When your inner energy begins to withdraw, it is not collapse, but the silent resistance of your true self against a life that has drifted away from its own truth. And for the empath, the urge to lie down all day does not appear randomly. It appears at the exact moment the soul recognizes what the heart has been trying to deny. The relationship with the narcissist has reached its final limit. For months, even years, you strained yourself to keep the peace, to stabilize, to heal what could never be healed. You tried to understand them, tried to love them with a love that exceeded your own internal capacity. But Jung says the soul cannot be deceived by effort or sacrifice. It only responds to truth. And when the truth of this relationship has already decayed, the soul stops pouring energy into it like a stream slowly drying up, not because there is no more water, but because it no longer wishes to nourish that soil. From a Jungian perspective, the urge to lie down is not surrender. It is an intelligent pause. When the body no longer wants to move forward, it is because the soul is pulling you inward to confront what you have avoided, that you've been carrying the emotional weight for both, that you've traded your boundaries just to maintain an imbalanced love, that you've been living as a smaller version of yourself to fit into their darkness. And one day, your body refuses to wake up on time, refuses to enter meaningless conversations, refuses to keep trying. Jung calls this moment the silent breaking point, the place where the soul declares, I no longer consent to this life. This is not weakness. This is the first act of honesty after a long period of pretending to be strong. And in that moment that feels like collapse, a process of rebirth is quietly beginning. Because only when the soul withdraws from a relationship can the empath truly be free to move into a new chapter, one no longer guided by the fear of loss, but by awakening. The urge to lie down is the Jungian signal that you are leaving the narcissist from the inside long before you leave them through external action. It is not forced, not dramatic. It is simply the soul's way of protecting you when you no longer have the strength to protect yourself. Part 1. When the body speaks before the mind can understand. The first thing Jung wants us to understand is this. The body always knows the truth before the mind does. When an empath stays tied to a narcissist for too long, they do not collapse all at once. They erode slowly. They are worn down bit by bit in silence until the body begins sending signals the mind can no longer ignore. The heaviness upon waking, the invisible resistance when trying to get out of bed, the moments of standing before a mirror and no longer recognizing yourself, these are not signs of weakness. They are the language of the unconscious, a language without words, yet more accurate than any self-explanation you attempt. According to Jung, the soul withdraws energy from anything that no longer aligns with the true self. And in a narcissistic relationship, this moment arrives earlier than you think. It arrives when you have tried too hard, loved too deeply, forgiven to the point of thinning your own heart. When an empath must constantly carry the emotional weight of the narcissist, soothing their rage, understanding their wounds, enduring their indifference, and still holding the relationship together, the body enters what Jung calls a loss of soul connection. It's the moment you no longer feel you are living your own life. You react according to their needs. You show up according to their expectations. You are gentle when they require it, silent when they demand it, strong when they crumble. You become the healer, the rescuer, the emotional storm bearer. But what you don't realize is that your body is recording every crack, every injustice, every moment you had to swallow your own sorrow to prioritize them. And then one day, instead of fighting, the body chooses refusal. Not dramatic, not loud, not rebellious, just unwilling. Unwilling to get up. Unwilling to respond. Unwilling to try. Jung calls this the first signal of energetic withdrawal, when the soul stops supplying life fuel to a relationship that is no longer compatible. What's striking is this. Your mind may still say, I need to try one more time, but the body has already stopped. The soul has stepped out of the game long before you do. The empath's exhaustion in a narcissistic relationship is never random. It does not appear in the intoxicating early days of passion, admiration, and false depth. It appears only when the soul realizes it has lived too long inside a role that was never truly its own. Jung wrote that the soul is forever loyal to truth, and whenever we live away from that truth, energy begins breaking apart from within. Jung calls this erosion of the self, the unconscious process that makes you shrink in order to fit the narcissist's chaos. You speak more softly so you won't trigger them. You think twice before saying anything at all. You censor your own emotions because you know your sincerity will be twisted into an attack. Slowly, you stop living from authenticity and start living from defense. The irony is this. While you believe you're trying to preserve the relationship, your soul is sending distress signals through the very exhaustion you feel. Your body isn't tired because you're weak, but because you've been doing the emotional labor of two souls for far too long, healing them while swallowing your own pain. And then one day, the fatigue becomes something more than fatigue. It becomes a form of awakening. When you no longer want to react, no longer want to explain, no longer want to take responsibility for their emotions, it isn't coldness. It is the final sign of understanding. You realize no amount of love can fill the bottomless void inside them. And at that moment, what you thought was collapse is actually the beginning. Because when the body refuses to continue, that is when truth begins to surface. The truth that you have sacrificed too much. The truth that you have lost yourself. And the truth that your soul is calling you home. Part 2, the withdrawal of energy. When the unconscious begins to leave the relationship, when the exhaustion of part 1 rises to the point where you no longer have the inner strength to carry the life of two people, something else begins happening quietly, something most people never notice. The unconscious begins preparing to leave the relationship long before your conscious mind can make a decision. Jung calls this the withdrawal of psychic energy, a process in which the soul reclaims the life force it once poured into a place that no longer supports your growth. But this phenomenon is not only metaphysical. Science observes it just as clearly. In studies of the nervous system by Dr. Elaine Aron, empaths, especially highly sensitive individuals, experience chronic emotional overload when they must constantly maintain stability for a narcissist. The nervous system, like a door knocked on too many times, begins to shut itself down for protection. This is when you realize you no longer react as quickly, no longer want to argue, and no longer feel compelled to save anything. This aligns astonishingly with Jung's observation. When the true self is pushed out of the center of life, the unconscious switches off lights in places that have become dark, like a house losing power room by room. You no longer want to engage in their stories. You no longer want to fight for a distant future. You no longer feel the urge to explain or prove anything. This isn't you changing. This is energy withdrawing from what has rotted. Bessel van der Kolk's research in The Body Keeps the Score also shows that the body has a mechanism of shutting down when it cannot withstand further emotional harm. It reduces nervous system engagement, lowers motivation, and decreases attachment, like a river slowly changing course after years of blockage. The new direction is unclear. What's clear is that the old flow can no longer continue, and that's when subtle signs begin to appear. You no longer find them attractive the way you once did. Promises that once moved you now sound hollow. Arguments no longer destabilize you, they simply drain you. Their silence no longer panics you, it makes you reflect. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz calls this stage psychic disinvestment, an inner withdrawal of capital. Like a garden stripped of nutrients, the psyche stops pumping energy into seeds that will never grow. If part 1 is the exhaustion of the heart, part 2 is the quiet migration of the soul. You haven't walked away physically, but your energy has already gone ahead of you, You still speak, still live together, still go through the motions, but you no longer belong there. The relationship remains as a shell. The inside has begun to hollow out. Part 3, when the body just wants to lie down. The final sign, the empath, has escaped the narcissist's psychological pull. When the unconscious has already reclaimed its energy and the nervous system has stopped supplying fuel to a relationship made of nothing but instability, the body begins to speak for the soul in a very specific language. You just want to lie down. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to use your strength to participate in anything related to them. This is not laziness, and it is not weakness. According to Jung, this is the moment when life energy refuses to continue serving a psychological structure that has completed its task. That urge to lie down is like an invisible wall, holding you back before you unconsciously fall back into old cycles. Modern neuroscience, especially polyvagal theory, shows that when someone is placed in an environment of prolonged emotional stress, the body will automatically shift into a shutdown state, making you want to stop all movement and withdraw. For an empath living beside a narcissist, this state is not accidental. It is the result of holding up a distorted relationship for too long, one in which you are always the emotional regulator, the one taking responsibility, and the one being hurt. When the body begins to want to lie down, it is a sign that your inner self has recognized a truth your conscious mind still hesitates to admit. You cannot and should not hold on to anything anymore. It pulls you out of their rhythm, stops you from reacting out of habit, stops you from being dragged into the emotional games you used to be so easily caught in. In this state, the narcissist will often try even harder to provoke a reaction from you, but you will notice you no longer feel any desire to participate. It is not that you are being cold, it is that your energy is no longer there. Jung describes this as the stage of withdrawing into the ego center, when the soul begins to gather back the parts of you that were scattered throughout the journey of loving the wrong person. You feel as if you no longer want to explain, no longer want to fix, no longer want to listen to one more justification, and strangely, this silence no longer terrifies you as it once did. On the contrary, it carries a quiet clarity, as if you are standing outside a movie in which you used to play the lead role. Lying down in the psychological sense is the moment the old ego dissolves to make space for a new structure to form. You no longer belong to that emotional vortex. The soul has already stepped out first, and the body is holding you still so that your conscious mind can catch up. This is the moment many Jungian analysts call the point of no return. You have left that relationship, not through some dramatic act, but through a complete shift of consciousness. You lie down not to end everything, but to prepare to get up in a different way, stronger, truer, and no longer dependent on the person who once drained you. Part 4. The Silent Awakening. When the empath becomes a version, the narcissist can no longer reach. When an empath has lain down long enough for the body and soul to fully reclaim their energy, something very subtle begins to happen. Life energy returns, but with a completely different quality. It does not arrive as excitement or a burst of motivation after a short break. It arrives like the first deep breath after years of being held in. Jung describes this as the stage where energy is reoriented inward, when libido is no longer poured into other people, but begins to flow back to nourish the self, something empaths often forget to do. This awakening is not loud. You do not leap up and declare that you have changed. On the contrary, it is like dawn appearing after a long night, slow, warm, and undeniable. You begin to notice things that were always there, but that you never had enough stillness to truly see. You realize that silence no longer makes you feel lonely the way it used to. It becomes a new safe space where your mind reconnects with the deeper needs you once sacrificed to preserve the relationship. At this stage, the empath no longer turns back to heal anyone else. They turn inward to heal themselves. The urge to save a wound that has been with them for so long begins to dissolve. Research on psychological boundaries shows that when a person starts to sense themselves without going through other people's emotions, The brain regions responsible for self-awareness, such as the insula, become more active, and this corresponds closely to Jung's description of ego restructuring. You will notice yourself changing in ways that are subtle but unmistakable. You are no longer triggered by the narcissist's usual moves. Their promises, apologies, and expressions of regret no longer affect you. You no longer feel the need to prove that you are right. You no longer feel responsible for the damage you did not create. You start asking, who am I without them? And for the first time, that question doesn't scare you anymore. This is when the empath enters what Jung calls individuation. Oh no, not a new ego, not a new mask, but the true self rising after years of being obscured by the hunger to be understood and genuinely loved. We can picture this process like cleaning up a ruined room after a storm. You are no longer cleaning so that someone else can come back. You are cleaning so that you yourself can live there. You begin to reconsider your boundaries, not to shrink yourself, but to protect what is sacred. You start to feel your self-worth through what you choose to keep, not through what you strain to hold on to. And the most astonishing thing that happens at this stage is this. The narcissist can no longer reach you, not because you hate them, not because you want to punish them, but because the energetic orbits of the two of you no longer intersect. The narcissist has always relied on your reactions to maintain their power. But once you step into the energy field of inner sovereignty, all the reactions they depend on, anger, explanations, panic, pleading, disappear as if they never existed. Jung calls this the symbolic severing of the soul, and only those who have lived through it know how deep it truly feels. This is also when you begin to see the world not through the lens of survival, but through the lens of choice. You no longer seek relationships to fill the void the narcissist left. You begin to choose connections based on awareness, not scarcity. Those who once made you feel heavy gradually fade from your psychological horizon. New, healthier people start appearing as if the universe were rearranging your path. The most beautiful part is that you do not need to announce your rebirth. Your transformation reveals itself through the way you smile, the way you say no, the way you no longer allow others to violate your boundaries. The rebirth of an empath always happens in silence, but it shakes the foundation of their entire life. Part 5. The final transformation. When the empath steps out of the narcissist's gravity field and becomes a solar system of their own, when the empath has fully awakened, a deeper phase of transformation begins, the phase Jung calls the re-establishment of the ego, self-axis. If previously the empath was pulled into the narcissist's emotional vortex like a small planet orbiting a fake sun, then at this stage they begin to form a gravitational center of their own. And the moment a new center of gravity appears, the old gravitational pull collapses. This is exactly what the narcissist never anticipates. They are used to operating through psychological attraction, promises, inconsistency, devaluation, silent treatment to control. All of these only work as long as you are still rotating in their orbit. But once your psychological axis has shifted, every move they make becomes ineffective. Not because you are fighting them, but because your being is no longer compatible with them. Many psychoanalysts, including Heinz Kohut, who developed self-psychology, have pointed out that when a person reconstructs their self after a period of invasion and fragmentation, they enter a stage where old triggers no longer work. This explains why, at this point, the empath not only stops reacting, but truly no longer feels affected. Their heart no longer resonates with false remorse. Their mind is no longer pulled into the script of repeated blame. Jung calls this the field separation disentanglement. It means the two shadows have detached from each other. The two psychic systems are no longer intertwined. This transformation is not dramatic. It unfolds in silence. But it changes everything. You look at them and no longer see the person who was once everything. You hear their words and feel no urge to respond. You look back at the past and no longer see where you were at fault. You see your life expand without needing them in it. You feel a peace you didn't know existed before. Interestingly, when you enter this stage, the narcissist begins to unravel. According to relational power theory, losing the other person's feedback means losing the identity they constructed for themselves. What used to feed them, your emotions, your reactions, your participation, is gone. But that unraveling no longer has anything to do with you. You no longer feel responsible for soothing, fixing, or explaining anything to anyone. You direct your energy toward rebuilding your inner world. You set boundaries not to oppose anyone, but to safeguard the new rhythm of life your soul has just formed. This is when the empath becomes a solar system of their own, generating their own light instead of reflecting someone else's, deciding their own gravitational pull instead of being dragged by another's, defining their own worth instead of letting someone else define it. This transformation is quiet, but it is enduring. It is like an ancient tree finally rooting itself deep into the earth after years of being shaken by storms. From this point on, you do not become stronger. You become whole, and that is something no narcissist can ever invade, possess, or destroy again. And you understand, the urge to lie down all day was never a sign of an ending. It was a sign of rebirth, a silent rebirth, powerful enough to shift the entire orbit of your life. And when you reach the end of this journey, you will finally see a truth you were never quiet enough to recognize before. It was not the narcissist who changed you. It was your own soul using that shock as a catalyst to awaken the version of you that you were always meant to become. Everything that once made you collapse, the heavy nights, the endless arguments, the sacrifices that cost you your sense of self, turns out to have been the groundwork for an inner life, blooming in ways they could never have predicted. Jung once said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and you have lived that fully. You faced the darkness not to be consumed by it, but to pull yourself out of it, layer by layer, with a level of honesty the narcissist could never tolerate, but your soul desperately needed. The urge to lie down all day, the feeling that confused you, shamed you, exhausted you, was actually a secret invitation from the deepest part of your being. An invitation to stop, to break from the old orbit, to stop revolving around someone else and begin revolving around yourself. You were not collapsing. You were changing direction. You were not weakening. You were drawing your energy back to the center. You were not ending. You are entering a new form of existence, where everything you do no longer comes from injury or fear, but from awareness, boundaries, and the self-respect you have consciously reclaimed. And when you rise from that phase quietly, without theatrics, without needing to prove anything, you will notice something strange. The world is the same, but you are no longer the person who entered that relationship. You have become the person your old self once dreamed of, but never had the courage to embody. The narcissist may never understand what changed in you, but they will feel it. Your peace is a climate they cannot breathe in. Your steadiness is a language they cannot speak. And your energy is a territory they no longer have a passport to enter. In the end, this journey was never about them. It was about you, about reclaiming the map of your soul, about awakening from an old illusion, and about stepping into a new life with the understanding that no one can take your power once you have returned to the center of yourself. And from this moment onward, every step you take will no longer come from the place of wanting to be loved, but from knowing you deserve love, no longer from the fear of being abandoned, but from the truth that you cannot be lost once you have found yourself. You did not just leave the narcissist. You returned to the life you were meant to live,